In 2014, 15% of secondary school students had taken some kind of illegal drug, 10% admitting that it was in the last year, and 6% within the month. There has been some decline in young people taking drugs, however, it is still a massive issue that society faces. This documentary should help to shed light on drug abuse among young people, showing the dangers and long-term effects of drugs on society and their body. Jacob Hill, once a budding entrepreneur, earning Young Entrepreneur of the Year and being recognised by the royal family, made an unfortunate mistake that would change his life forever. Caught up in a company debt, he thought he had no one to turn to. Without thinking of the consequences, he decided to sell drugs to pay off his debt. For this, he received 21 months in prison and a mistake that would follow him for his entire life.
Hi, my name's Jacob. I'm the son of two police officers. I run my own business and I'm here to share my story about how I ended up in prison for selling drugs. At university, I started a company which supplied people with camping equipment for when they were going to music festivals. It was called the Lazy Camper. I'd received £300,000 investment, sponsored the UK's largest music festival, had 6 staff, and was Yorkshire's Young Entrepreneur of the Year. Prince Andrew even came to our office to see what we were up to, so it was a real sharp climb, you know, and by the time I was 22, I'd not got the sales I expected in the business. I'd overpromised to investors through my own naivety. From 19 till 22, doing several festivals a year, I was obviously around drugs. It was an obvious thing for me to say, okay, well, there's drugs at festivals, these guys are getting away with it, why can't I? I always had this mentality that if they can do it, why can't I? But this time I made the decision and took it a bit too far, and I went to a festival, took some drugs with me, I took some weed and MDMA, and basically I had the intention to sell them. I got arrested by undercover security, and I was in all this debt and all this worry of how am I going to get out of this situation. I didn't want to talk to people about it. I didn't want to speak to my family. I didn't want to look at what support out there was in the public, or even from people at the university that I could have spoken to. I didn't want to talk to them because I was almost too proud, and I thought, well, I'm indestructible because I've had all this success before. I'll just get out of this situation. And rather than asking for help, I made the active decision to break the law. 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning, both my parents, who were separated, had their house raided by the police whilst I was in a police cell for 18 hours. Given that they're both police officers retired themselves, you can imagine the frustration, the shock, and all I was worried about when I was sitting in that police cell, and it's not something you think about at 16, 17, 20, maybe even 30, you know, that when the police officers were knocking on my parents' door, what are the first thing they're going to be thinking? My son's dead. My son's, you know, it's something awful's happened to him. And it's not worse, but it's terrible, the fact that the police officer said, we've arrested your son for drug supply, especially when they've worked all their life putting people like me away in prison. I've never been in trouble with the police before, and there was that fear of I could go to prison from anywhere between, you know, I could get community service, I could go to prison for up to 9 years. 9 years. In my head, I'd have been 31 by the time I got out. It was a terrifying concept. Standing there in that dock, I was just praying to be sentenced, you know, give me something today, at least just let me walk away from this, let me start rebuilding and reworking my life from this point. The judge saved me from having to go home. He says, I'm going to remand you for 2 nights, and that means he's going to actually send me to prison that night for 2 nights. So I was actually inside the dock when the judge sent me down to the cells for 2 days, and it was the first night inside the prison, and it was such a strange experience. It was what you expected. I was put in the first night centre. There was bars, there was clanging of keys, there was prison officers everywhere. There were lads looking out of the window saying, you know, who's the fresh meat coming into the prison. It was a really fearful experience. One thing you never prepared for, and I prepared a lot for what I thought prison could be, was when the prison officer finally closes that door and locks that key. That sound is you being locked somewhere against your will, you know, for many the first time in their life. On the Friday morning I was handcuffed back up, put on the prison bus, or the sweat box as it was, and then driven to the courts. The judge said he'd read all my references, read the letters. I'm obviously a positive person in the community, made a mistake, but it can't go unpunished. It was time to face the consequences of everything that was happening. And then the judge said, I wanted to not give you a custodial sentence today. I've taken 2 days to really think about it, but I'm going to sentence you to 28 months in custody, and you know, you'll do 14 inside basically, unless you get your tag, which is a home arrest. And that was it. You don't get to say bye to your family. You don't get to give them a hug, give them a wave. I wouldn't see my family for another 2 weeks from that point. I wouldn't speak to them for another week. And the guy next to me, the bailiff, it just takes you down. That's it. He handcuffs you back up in the back room and walks you down the steps. Prison is it's not natural. It's not right. You know, I mean, since being released, I've never appreciated, you know, running my own schedule so much. You'd wake up and you'd be unlocked from your cell at 8 o'clock. By 8:30 you'd be setting off to work. You'll work for 3 hours. You'll then come back to your wing where there's yourself and 50 odd other men, and you'll be on that wing for 2 hours over lunch, and every other day you'll be locked behind your door for those 2 hours. You'll then go back to work at 1:30 for another 3 hours, and then at 4:30 you're back on your wing. You've got to make your calls to your family, go on the yard for a bit of exercise, and then you're back behind your door at 5:45 at night, door locked. You're spending about 16 hours a day behind your door on average, isolated from the world, just you. I saw some awful things inside, and it varied. I saw a guy get beat up with a table leg. I saw a guy who was known to have drugs on him. The lads, well, actually, the guy was known to be in for a previous offence, which was some form of sexual assault. And the lads wanted to get back at him for what he did, because prisoners don't appreciate that type of behaviour, and they got him drugged up on this awful drug called Spice. He passed out, and they put a spoon up his arse. It was a strange thing, and then they left him on the middle of the wing with his pants down, and that was a case of making an example of him. 4 lads were then taken to the police station to be charged for sexual assault. The cycle's just repeated itself. It was seeing what prison was like. You know, the guy who stopped breathing because he took too many drugs, and they had to defibrillate him, and then they had to do CPR on him, and he stopped breathing in the middle of sewing boxer shorts. Like, if it's not already difficult enough that you've got to sew 200 pairs of boxer shorts a day, he was taking drugs, and he ended up overdosing. And I've never seen that before. I've never seen the impact drugs has on people, and seeing that was, you won't forget it. You don't forget that anytime soon. And it just makes me think, you know, what type of environment is prison, because there's so many people who are struggling enough as it is in life, and then we lock them up and put them away for 16 hours a day, put them into meaningless work where it's not very fun. It's not fun. I had to sew boxer shorts for 2 months, 200 pairs a day, and it's not fun. We often do things in life, and sometimes it's a mistake that we do them, and other times we know it's wrong and we still do it anyway. And it might be we're not thinking as clearly as we should. It might be that we just think this is the only route and the only option I have. I saw selling drugs as the only option I had at that time, when in hindsight, if I'd have just asked for help, I could have spoken to parents, friends, family. I was just scared of letting people down. But I'll tell you, the worst thing about not going to people and not asking for help, you think not being able to pay your debts is bad. When you've got police officers raiding your parents' house But that's much worse when you're having to talk to them about your issues, not choosing to talk to them about your issues. I think that's much worse. And I only say to people who are having a tough time with anything in life, speak to someone, speak to a friend, speak to a counsellor, speak to a family member. Just start talking, because that's so much more important than thinking you can tackle the big problems by yourself and making those decisions that are wrong.
Jacob did not reach out to the various charities and support systems in place for people who find themselves in trouble. Unfortunately, this is more common than not. 15.8% of young adults admitted to using cannabis. Of that, 975,000 are using a gateway drug, which will lead to Class A drugs. In 2014, 2,248 young people died of drug misuse. Of that, 20% of young offenders admitted to using a Class A drug, which is heroin and crack cocaine. 44% of these admitted that they committed a crime in order to gain these illegal substances. People who have been convicted of crimes are less likely to be employed. For example, if you've been convicted of a crime to do with drugs, you are not going to be a civil servant. You are not going to be able to be a teacher, a care worker, a driver, and even a shopkeeper. Are the actions that you're taking right now, are you willing to let them ruin your life? Jacob was very fortunate and he worked very hard to turn his life around. But unfortunately, this does not always happen. All of this could have been prevented by Jacob just reaching out to charities such as Frank and Addiction. These are non-profit organisations dedicated to helping those in need, especially when it comes to drugs. Please think before you take your actions and look for these charities. They are willing to help anyone without asking questions.